January 26, 1945. A frozen field on the edge of Holtzwihr, in the Alsace region of eastern France. A German soldier peers through the smoke. Somewhere ahead of him, a single American is holding off his entire unit. Not a squad, not a platoon, one man. The soldier is a Gebirgsjäger, a mountain fighter. He has spent 3 years on the Arctic front in Norway. He has survived Murmansk, where the temperature drops to 40 below and the wind strips the flesh from exposed skin. He has survived conditions that broke ordinary soldiers. He has done things that most men could not imagine doing once. He has done them for 3 years. And now, on this flat open field, so different from the mountains he knows, he is watching something he cannot explain. He tries to locate the source of the fire. He cannot. The machine gun is coming from a direction that makes no sense. From something that should be dead. From something that should have killed its own operator 20 minutes ago. He does not know the American's name. He does not know that the man on the other side of that smoke is 19 years old. That he weighs less than 100 pounds. That 6 months ago he was a sergeant, not an officer. A boy from the cotton fields of Texas who had never finished the 5th grade. He only knows that he cannot stop him. And after more than an hour of trying every weapon at his disposal, rifles, machine guns, tank fire, his unit turns around. They walk back to the village they came from. Dismayed. That is the word the military records use. Dismayed. An elite German mountain division, forged in the Arctic, stopped by a single American. Walking back across the snow, unable to explain what had just happened to them. This is the story of how that was possible. And why the German army, for all its discipline, all its doctrine, all its decorated veterans, could never have produced the man who did it. Hold that image for a moment. 6 tanks, 250 infantry soldiers, against one man, alone, on top of a burning vehicle that could explode at any second. The German force attacking Holtzwihr that afternoon had every advantage. White camouflage suits, organized assault formation, armored support, numerical superiority so complete it wasn't even a calculation, it was a certainty. And the American they were advancing toward had almost none of that. His company, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, had been destroyed the day before. 102 of his 120 men were casualties. Every officer was dead or wounded except one. The reinforcements that were supposed to arrive had not arrived. The ground was frozen solid, too hard to dig a single foxhole. His men had slept in the open, in the snow, among their own dead. He had no defensive position, no cover, almost no men. What he had was a burning tank destroyer, a 50 caliber machine gun, and a field telephone. And when the Germans tried to find where the fire was coming from, they couldn't. Remember that detail. It will matter soon. Because the reason they couldn't find him is not just a story about one man's courage. It is a story about what kind of country and what kind of system produces a man who climbs onto a burning vehicle alone and keeps firing. Before we go further, if this story is the kind of history you come here for, a like on this video costs you nothing and helps this channel reach others who care about these men and what they did. And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week we go into the archives, find the stories that didn't make the headlines, and bring them back. Now, to understand this man, you first need to understand the battle he was fighting, and why almost no one remembers it. Because Holtzwihr did not happen in isolation. The Colmar Pocket. Most people have never heard of it. John Keegan, arguably the greatest military historian of the 20th century, did not even index it in his landmark history of the Second World War. Stephen Ambrose, who wrote more about the American soldier in Europe than almost anyone, mentions it 3 times. All 3 times, he is writing about arguments between generals, not about the men doing the fighting. And yet, in 20 days of combat, from January 20th to February 9th, 1945, the Allied forces fighting to collapse the Colmar Pocket suffered more than 21,000 casualties. The Germans suffered more than 38,000. 4 medals of honor were awarded for actions during that campaign. One of them to Murphy. The Colmar Pocket was the last significant German presence on French soil west of the Rhine, an 850-square-mile bridgehead that Hitler had ordered defended to the last man. To lose it was to open the road to the Rhine crossings and the invasion of Germany itself. Commanding the German defense was General Siegfried Rasp, a Bavarian officer who had taken command of the 19th Army in December 1944. His army consisted of 7 infantry divisions, 1 mountain division, and 1 Panzer brigade, all under strength, all fighting on a timeline they knew was closing. His mountain unit, the 2nd Mountain Division under General Hans Degen, had just been transferred from the Arctic front in Norway to the flat plains of Alsace. These were elite soldiers, Austrians and Bavarians, mountain men by birth, men who had spent years fighting in conditions that no other division in the Wehrmacht had faced. But the division that arrived in Alsace in January 1945 was not the same division that had conquered Norway in 1940. The original veterans were still there, but they had been supplemented with replacements after the punishment of the Soviet winter offensives. Men who had not gone through the same training. Men who did not have the same instincts. The quality, as the records confirm, did not match what it once was. And now they were being asked to fight in terrain that was the opposite of everything they knew. Not mountain passes, not frozen Norwegian forests, flat, open, snow-covered fields with nowhere to hide and no elevation to command. On January 26th, Rasp gave the order. Retake the Holtzwihr woods. Retake Holtzwihr. If the Americans held those woods, the northern sector of the pocket collapsed. It was not a desperate gamble. It was a calculated counterattack. 250 of his best men, 6 Panzer tanks, against what German reconnaissance had correctly identified as a shattered, leaderless American company with almost no armor support. They were correct about almost everything, except the one man they had not accounted for. Audie Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, in Hunt County, Texas, the 7th of 12 children. His father was a sharecropper who eventually abandoned the family. His mother died when Audie was 16. He left school after the 5th grade, not because he was incapable, but because there was no time. There were younger siblings to feed. There were fields to work. There were rabbits and squirrels to hunt with a .22 rifle because without them, some nights there was no dinner. He learned to shoot the way most boys learn to read, by necessity, by repetition, until it became instinct. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 16 years old and tried to enlist immediately. The Marines turned him down, too young, too small. The Navy turned him down. The Army eventually took him, after his sister signed a document falsely declaring he was 18. He stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighed 100 pounds. When he arrived for basic training, officers looked at him and saw a boy, baby-faced, soft-spoken, so slight that bartenders would refuse to serve him for the rest of his life. What they could not see yet was what the cotton fields had put inside him. Here is the thing about growing up the way Audie Murphy grew up. There is no one to call. There is no system to fall back on. When the crops fail, you find another way. When your father leaves, you become the man of the house at 14. When your mother dies, you keep going because stopping means your brothers and sisters don't eat. You learn very early that the only resource you can count on is yourself. That lesson, forged in poverty and loss before he ever held a rifle and uniform, would become the most dangerous thing the United States Army ever put on a battlefield. By January 1945, Murphy had already been at war for nearly 3 years. He had landed in North Africa. He had fought through Sicily and Italy. He had come ashore in southern France in August 1944 and earned the Distinguished Service Cross for leading his platoon under fire through a vineyard ambush, killing 2 Germans and wounding a 3rd. He had been wounded twice. He had been promoted from private to staff sergeant. And then, 6 months before Holtzwihr, the Army gave him a battlefield commission to 2nd lieutenant. A piece of paper that changed his rank. Changed nothing else. By the morning of January 25th, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment had been shattered. The regiment was pushing south through the Holtzwihr woods, toward the fortified villages that guarded the northern approach to Colmar. German tanks and assault guns had hit the regiment repeatedly. The ground was frozen, too hard to dig a single foxhole. By the end of January 25th, 102 of Company B's 120 men were casualties. Every officer was dead or incapacitated, except one. That night, Murphy's remaining men slept in the snow, in the forest, beside their dead. The next morning, he was reinforced with 2 M10 tank destroyers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. It was not much, but it was something. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 26th, the Germans came out of Holtzwihr. 250 infantrymen, dressed in white, moving across the snow, 6 Panzer tanks, artillery barrage first, then the infantry, then the armor. Private Donald Ekman, watching from the tree line, remembered it clearly. Asterisk, you could see the pennants on the antenna of the German tanks. That got our attention right away. We also saw a huge sea of white infantry coming toward us. Asterisk, Murphy ordered his remaining men back into the trees, 200 yards into the forest. He stayed at the forward position alone with a field telephone, calling in artillery coordinates. Then a German shell hit the M10 tank destroyer closest to his position. The crew abandoned it. The vehicle was on fire. The ammunition inside was beginning to cook off, popping, banging, sending lethal fragments in every direction. The fuel tank could go at any moment. The explosion, if it came, would kill anyone within 50 yards. Murphy climbed onto it. He swung the .50 caliber machine gun on the turret toward the advancing German line, and he started firing. His battalion headquarters called on the field telephone. "How close are they to your position?" Murphy's answer, from the turret of a burning vehicle, asterisk, "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." Asterisk, for more than an hour he fired. He called in artillery strikes, on coordinates so close to his own position that the voice on the other end of the line warned him he was calling fire down on himself. "Let her go," Murphy said. "I'm leaving." He did not leave. The Germans could see the tank destroyer burning. They could see the smoke. What they could not determine, what began, after minutes of sustained assault, to unravel their entire advance, was where, exactly, the fire was coming from. The smoke concealed him. The noise of the burning vehicle masked the direction of his shots. Every time a German unit tried to move forward, rounds came from an angle that made no sense for a burning, abandoned vehicle. Their calculations kept failing. Their fire kept missing. 250 trained soldiers, 6 tanks, against a source of fire they could not locate, could not suppress, and could not explain. Their advance stalled, and then American fighter bombers found a gap in the cloud cover. The German infantry, already confused, already taking casualties from an invisible position, now under air attack, began to fall back toward Holtzwihr. Without infantry support, the German armor followed. They walked back across the snow. Murphy climbed down from the burning tank destroyer. His leg wound from the previous day had reopened. He was bleeding through his boot. The tank destroyer exploded behind him as he walked, the concussion throwing him into the snow. He got up. He walked back to his men. He refused medical attention, and he organized a counterattack. By the end of that afternoon, Company B had reoccupied its original positions. "Now step back. Step to the other side of that smoke. You are one of General Degen's Gebirgsjäger. You have survived Murmansk. You have survived the Soviet winter offensives of 1944. You have been pulled back through Norway, reorganized in Denmark, and transferred to this flat, open, alien landscape of Alsace that looks nothing like the terrain you trained for. You have been told to retake the Riedwer Woods from a shattered American company. The numbers make it certain. 250 men, 6 tanks, against what intelligence says is barely a platoon with almost no armor support. The attack begins. The enemy tank destroyer is hit. You watch the crew abandon it. The vehicle is burning. The position it was covering should now be empty. But the fire doesn't stop. Keeps coming. You try to identify where it's coming from. You try moving left. The fire finds you. You try moving right. The fire finds you. You direct tank rounds into the smoke. Nothing changes. Your men are falling and you cannot explain why, because the thing that is killing them should already be dead. Minutes pass. Then 10 minutes. Then 20. The field telephone at German headquarters begins to fill with reports that make no sense. The advance has stalled. The source of fire is unlocatable. Casualties are mounting from an invisible position. The calculations that made this attack look certain are failing in real time. Here is what a German sergeant would do in this situation, and this is the key to everything. He would wait for orders, not because he was a coward, not because he lacked courage, but because the system he had been trained in was built on the assumption that orders existed. That somewhere above him, an officer understood the situation and would provide direction. The Unteroffizier, the non-commissioned officer, was the backbone of execution. He was trusted, respected, essential, but his role was to carry out the plan, not to create a new one when the plan collapsed. When the plan collapsed, you waited. You reported up the chain. You held your position. You trusted that the machine would provide an answer. The machine in front of you at Holtzwihr was not waiting. He was not reporting up a chain of command. There was no chain above him. It had been destroyed the day before. Every officer was gone. Every structure was gone. He was alone on a burning vehicle with a machine gun and a field telephone, and he had made a decision that no German training manual had prepared you to encounter. He had decided that the mission was his to complete, regardless of what the situation looked like from the outside. In the German system, this was structurally impossible. Not because Germans lacked courage. The soldiers of the 2nd Mountain Division had demonstrated courage that most human beings will never be asked to produce. But courage within a system and courage outside a system are two different things. The Wehrmacht's doctrine, even its celebrated Auftragstaktik, its mission-type tactics, was ultimately designed for officers. It assumed a hierarchy. It assumed that when conditions changed, a commissioned mind at some level of the chain would adapt the plan. It did not account for a cotton farmer's son from Texas who had never had a hierarchy to fall back on. Because in Hunt County, Texas, during the Great Depression, there was no hierarchy. There was no system. There was no one above you to give orders when everything went wrong. There was only the decision. Keep going or don't. Murphy had been making that decision since he was 14 years old. After more than an hour of fire from a source his men cannot locate, after fighter bombers appear in a gap in the clouds, the German advance does something it has not done in 3 years of fighting in Norway and the Arctic. It breaks. Not from a frontal assault. Not from superior firepower. Not from a flanking maneuver. From one man they cannot find, doing something their training told them was not possible. General Hans Degen received the report at his headquarters. The attack had been repelled. The Holtzwihr woods remained in American hands. His men had retreated dismayed, in the language of the military record, after more than an hour of sustained assault against a position that should, by every calculation, have been empty. 11 days later, Degen was wounded in combat and removed from command. The day after Murphy's stand, the 3rd Battalion of the 30th Infantry Regiment captured Holtzwihr itself. The Germans, the records note, were disheartened by their lack of progress against the Americans, and pulled most of their men and material out of the area. By January 28th, 2 days after Murphy climbed onto that burning tank, the areas east of the Ill River and north of the Colmar Canal were clear of German forces. The Colmar Pocket held for 2 more weeks, but the momentum had broken. What Rasp's army could not recover was not ground. It was certainty. The certainty that the system worked, that the numbers added up, that 250 men and 6 tanks, against a shattered company with no officers, produced a predictable outcome. Murphy had made the outcome unpredictable. And unpredictability, in a military system built on calculation and order, is the most corrosive thing imaginable. The 2nd Mountain Division continued retreating. They fought in the Saar. They fought near the Moselle. They retreated into southern Germany. By May 1945, the survivors surrendered to the Americans. The same Americans they had failed to stop at Holtzwihr. General Rasp was captured. He was held as a prisoner of war in Munster by the British until 1947. The German 19th Army, which Hitler had ordered to defend the Colmar Pocket to the last man, lost the bulk of its experienced combat troops. It had to be rebuilt using Volkssturm, civilian militia, old men and teenagers, conscripted to replace soldiers who were gone. They left behind 55 armored vehicles and 66 artillery pieces on the fields of Alsace. And in the records of that defeat, in the after-action reports, In the accounts that survived the collapse of the Third Reich, there is no explanation for what happened on January 26th at the edge of the Holtzwihr woods. There is only the fact of it. One man, burning tank, an hour, and then the retreat. Murphy walked back to his men that afternoon, bleeding from his leg, covered in snow from where the explosion had thrown him. He refused evacuation. He organized the counterattack. And when it was over, when Company B had reoccupied its original positions, when the Germans had retreated to Holtzwihr, when the field was quiet, the survivors went down to the Colmar Canal to drink water. One of the men who was there described what they saw when they reached the water. Asterisk. The bodies were so thick, you had to push them aside to get a drink. Asterisk. Murphy spent that night with his men. Among the dead. In the snow. Without a foxhole. On ground they had paid for in a way that accounting cannot capture. On June 2, 1945, 5 months after Holtzwihr, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony near Salzburg, Austria. Murphy was 20 years old. He had received every combat decoration the United States Army offered. Every one. The Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, and 33 decorations in total, including honors from France and Belgium. No American soldier in the Second World War received more. He came home to a hero's welcome, his face on the cover of Life magazine. 300,000 Texans at his homecoming parade. James Cagney saw his photograph and invited him to Hollywood. He made 44 films. He played himself into Hell and Back in 1955. A film that stood as Universal Pictures' biggest box office hit for nearly 20 years. And every night, for the rest of his life, he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. The war did not end at Holtzwihr. Not for him. He suffered what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, flashbacks, fits of rage that he couldn't explain and couldn't control. He talked about it publicly at a time when no one talked about it, because he understood that other veterans were suffering in silence and he had the standing to say something. There is V-Day without, he wrote at the end of the war. Asterisk, but no peace within. Asterisk. He died on May 28, 1971, in a plane crash near Roanoke, Virginia. He was 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, in Section 46. His grave is the second most visited in the entire cemetery, after that of President John F. Kennedy. He had asked, before he died, that his headstone be plain, inconspicuous, like that of an ordinary soldier. The Army honored that request. The visitors who come, thousands of them every year, do not honor it. They leave coins, flags, flowers, notes. They come from across the country and from other countries. They stand at the plain stone and they try to understand what a man is, exactly, who climbs onto a burning tank alone and keeps firing. Most of them leave without a complete answer. That is probably the right response. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not the heroism, though it was real and extraordinary. Not the decorations, though they were earned in ways that most of us will never be tested. What I want you to take is this. The German military system that faced Murphy at Holtzwihr was, by any technical measure, more sophisticated than his. It had a longer tradition, more experienced officers, a military culture that stretched back centuries. And it failed, not because of numbers, not because of equipment, not because of tactics. It failed because it was built on the assumption that the system produces the outcome, and that when the system breaks down, the outcome breaks down with it. Murphy was the proof that the assumption was wrong, because he was not a system. He was not the output of a military academy or a Prussian tradition. He was the output of Hunt County, Texas, in the depths of the Great Depression, of a childhood that demanded everything from him before the Army ever asked him for anything. Leadership is not a rank. It is not a commission or a promotion or a piece of paper. It is the decision in the moment when everything has collapsed, when the structure is gone, when there is no order coming and no one left to give one, to act anyway. The German soldier watching from the field that January afternoon did not understand what he was seeing. He was seeing what a country looks like when it builds its soldiers from the inside out instead of the outside in. He was seeing Hunt County, Texas, standing on a burning tank, and he could not explain it, because his system had never tried to build that, didn't know how. If this story stayed with you, if the image of that 19-year-old, alone on a burning tank in the snow of Alsace, means something to you, please take a second and leave a like. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel find the people who care about these stories the way you do. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the bell. Every week we go back into the archives and pull out the history that the big books forgot. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? And if someone in your family served in World War II, in any branch, on any front, tell me about them in the comments. Their name, where they served, what you know of what they did. Because the Colmar Pocket, the battle where Murphy earned his Medal of Honor, is one of the most forgotten campaigns of the entire American war in Europe. 21,000 Allied casualties in 20 days. For Medals of Honor. And almost no one knows its name. These men deserve better than that. Tell me about yours.